Welcome back to Common Ground. This is strange. We're not in front of each other. I miss your presence, David.
I miss your
You know,
face.
I feel like the in-person experience was pretty riveting, so I'm just going to have to amp up the energy for this. We're going to talk about something which is pretty topical today. Everyone at the moment is talking about these tariffs that are coming out of the US. I think everyone's worried. We obviously all pay too much already for a cup of coffee, or I know you don't drink coffee, so tea,
Sure.
Coke Zero. But we're all paying a lot. So introducing tariffs and introducing taxes is quite a scary subject for a lot of people. It keeps coming up because there's a lot of negotiations happening with different countries. So today we're going to chat a little bit about that, and I think it'll be pretty interesting. So let's start with just giving a bit of an introduction about tariffs. What is it all about, and why are we talking about it?
Sure. So, firstly, I want to say I'm not an expert on tariffs. I studied economics at school and stuff, but so I know a bit about it, but I've done a bit of research and we're going to share today. We're going to try, even though you and I have our own personal views about tariffs, I think we're going to try as much as possible to kind of keep this as neutral as possible and just kind of give people the facts about tariffs. So, what are tariffs? The tariff is essentially a tax that's placed on imported goods. So,
Mm.
in the example of the US tariffs, if someone in the US is importing goods from another country, they're going to pay this extra cost. So it's important to note that it's the importer that pays the tax to the government, not the country exporting the goods. So, as an example, say I'm a cool T-shirt designer and I've designed a T-shirt which has got a skull and crossbones with headphones on it, and I buy my plain T-shirts from China, right?
Mm.
Now, when those T-shirts arrive in the US, I need to pay the cost of those a tax on the cost of those T-shirts to the US government. And either as an importer, I can either choose to swallow the cost and make less profit, or more likely, I'm going to pass the cost on to the customers. And generally, governments use tariffs for two reasons. So one is to sort of protect and encourage domestic production. So because the goods from overseas are going to be more expensive by comparison, but they
Mhm.
also use them as kind of like a leverage when you're negotiating with someone. I'm going to smack a tariff on you. No, I'll smack a tariff on you, kind of thing,
Mm.
as a way to try and extract some sort of concession from the other country.
Yeah. And look, I think it's really interesting because I think it's showing a lot of the different relationships between the different countries. And yeah, curious to see what negotiations take place. So we normally bring up a few different talking points for people to bring up when they're chatting about this at the dinner table or have you. So why now? And what's the logic behind these tariffs? Why they're being brought up?
So the tariffs that we're talking about right now were the ones that were announced at the start of April 2025. So the
Mhm.
US announced some tariffs based on what they call, like, on what they've perceived to be as trade imbalances. So
Mm.
what a trade imbalance is the difference between how much money, the difference in dollars of how much stuff you import versus how much stuff you export. As an example, the US buys a heap of champagne from France, which is a lot of dollars value, but they're not buying a lot of corn from the US. I don't know if that's true or not, but like that's what causes a trade imbalance. Basically, one party is selling more to the other than vice versa. And this has always been a big talking point of the Trump administration, the trade imbalances, because they kind of perceive them as unfair, sorry. So like, why should I buy more champagne from you when you're buying none of my corn? That's the kind of
Yeah.
situation that they've been positioning.
But
And why specifically now and what's led to this point where tariffs are being considered by a lot of countries. I think there's a lot of uncertainty around globalization right now. There's a lot of people being a lot more wary of like the power, especially where China is concerned. So I think Trump is hoping that by making imports more expensive, US companies might consider investing more in domestic production.
yeah. Now, normally this is something that gets negotiated. We don't really hear a lot about it. I think the extent of these tariffs is probably what seems to be the most notable. So, why is it controversial now and will it backfire?
I mean, I can't tell the future, right? I don't think any economist can. Not that I'm an
Yeah.
economist, but I know no one can predict the future. If I could, I'd be a lot better off. I think, like you said, tariffs are generally negotiated over a period of a long time, and it can often be bi-party negotiation. In this
Mm,
case, I think a lot of countries were taken by surprise,
mm,
um, especially because the way that they calculated the tariffs was a bit weird, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But firstly, especially in the short term, how it might backfire is prices are going to go up. I think that's actually not controversial at all. That's inevitable. Anything that has any component or ingredient or even a finished good that comes from overseas is going to cost more. That's what tariffs do. So, food, clothes, home construction, technology, all of these have components that come from overseas. It's going to become more expensive. This is going to push inflation up. I
yeah.
think the second thing, building manufacturing up in a country takes a long time. It's not like you can just click a button and then all of a sudden you have a factory, right? So, and there's specific industries that are really important that take a really long time to build up. So,
Mhm.
two great examples are electric vehicles and semiconductors, which are areas where China or Taiwan are really strong. And these manufacturing processes are insanely complicated, and they've been developed over decades. Like since the 50s, the semiconductor industry has existed in Taiwan. Some companies are going to decide it's not worth actually making the investment in the US because it will never get to a point of economies of scale. So they might continue importing the bits that they need, and the US will never gain those jobs that they want.
No, I was gonna say, and I think that's the concern, right? It's like if there is that imbalance, is you've got some countries that are producing a lot, some countries that aren't, and then this is one way to kind of create a trade, but it can also have massive consequences.
Yeah, and I think the biggest reason this has been controversial is how it has been announced. Like it's been a
Yeah.
big roller coaster. If you followed it over the last few weeks, it was tariffs and they're on pause and now there's exceptions. The one thing that businesses hate more than anything is uncertainty. So
Mm,
if there's anything that's going to stop investment, it's these kinds of roller coaster announcements.
yeah. And look, I think we've seen it already. The stock market really responded when those tariffs got released, and it's bounced back a little bit. But everyone's talking about how it is very much a roller coaster. Coaster. So, like, what's the risk of it escalating?
Listen, ultimately, trade disputes like we're seeing now, they're not just about economics. Like it
Yeah.
reflects broader geopolitical rivalries, let's say. I think US and China, like as the kind of dominant powers of our generation, at least, like it's part of a bigger strategy, struggle around like dominance in tech and global influence and national security and things. The way that these tariff negotiations, or if you can call them that, these tariff announcements have been handled has kind of really like ramped up the pressure. There's a lot of other issues that we have, and increasing the economic pressure with tariffs can cause the other side to react in an unpredictable way. So there's Taiwan, there's the South China Sea stuff, the investments that China's making in Africa and the Pacific.
Mm,
And there's also a risk of kind of like splitting the world into different sides. If you're an African country that depends heavily on China for investment, are you going to align more with China or are you going to align more with the US? We can see already tensions spilling over into other areas like cybersecurity and investment restrictions, space, AI, which is another super interesting topic. It can be like a catalyst, which can have further reaching implications in terms of the relationships between countries in the world.
yeah. So yeah, it's definitely going to have a massive effect on the global stage. So normally in these sessions, we like to give people a bit of a question to impress. So what are we going to give the listeners so they can bring it up at the next conversation of tariffs, which will most likely be soon?
Most likely at this weekend's barbecue. For me, the big question that can be asked and can incite an interesting discussion is Taiwan and China are like so dominant in the EV and semiconductor supply chains. So I think a great question to ask is how realistic is it that we can actually have a Western centric supply chain? So like an integrated, built in the US or built in Europe tech industry where all the parts come from the US or from
Mhm.
Europe. Is that even achievable? So I think
Yeah.
that'd be a super interesting question to pose when you're next speaking about tariffs.
Yeah, and it's interesting because essentially countries are now having to think about, okay, well, we just offshored all our manufacturing industries, having Australia many years ago. Do they take it onshore again? Do they just continue on the current path? You know, do we go into new industries? So yeah, it's a big question. Well, look, I think it's a interesting topic. I think we're still on the roller coaster. I think the next couple of months will be very interesting. Hopefully, it's not going to go up to 300%, and then good luck trying to buy an EV.
Yeah,
uh,
totally.
I think it's been a really good session. I've definitely learned a lot. I hope our listeners have as well, and hopefully, I think we've been able to provide people some common ground around tariffs.